Welcome, welcome. This is Kim Ades from Frame of Mind Coaching, and I am the host of Resilience Radio, where I interview guests who are professionals at crushing the tough stuff. Today I have a very unique show. It's not an ordinary show because, first of all, I have two guests, and they're really exciting and notable. So the first is Tasha Roberts. She is a distinguished journalist, has done a ton of work with the Boston Globe, Essence Magazine. She was even the senior crime editor for People magazine. She's a multiple award winner, and she's an adjunct instructor at NYU in the area of journalism. Tasha, welcome.
Hi. How are you?
I'm great and really looking forward to this conversation. My second guest is Ron Ferguson, who has a PhD from MIT in economics, and he's currently a professor at Harvard University at the Harvard Kennedy School, and he's been there since 1983. Ron, welcome.
Thank you.
So why are these two people on this show, and what is this really about? It's really exciting for me to say that they've done some work in the area of studying what makes amazing, or let's call it super successful kids, what made them successful, and more specifically, what kind of parenting did they receive? So they studied a whole bunch of, call it students or kids or successful individuals, and looked back on their lives and examined very specifically what parenting approaches were at play. So I don't want to speak for you. Guys, please, first of all, you wrote a book. What's the name of the book?
It's called The Formula, Unlocking the Secrets to Raising Successful Children.
Okay. So what triggered you to do this?
Tasha, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start. So I was a reporter for the Boston Globe at the time, and my job was to travel all over the place. I had the course. It's called a rover job. So you just rove around the country, you meet all these fabulous people and interesting people, and you come up with story ideas. And I noticed that a lot of the really successful people, when they talked about their parents, the parents seem similar regardless of race. But I was also just interested in if you could teach parenting strategies. And I was interested in that because I was just wondering about African Americans and Latino Americans. Like, could you close the gap in that way? And so I just started interviewing people about that and wondered if there was some type of formula. And I did a story for the Boston Globe back in 2005 and interviewed Ron. And I knew Ron was he was involved with the achievement gap. He was considered one of the experts around the country on the achievement gap. And so I just kept in touch with Ron for a long time. And then in 2015, I decided I was interested in writing a book and called Ron, just to see if he thought there was actually a formula. And I just got a big shock because he said, not only do I think it, I've been working on something. And that got chills. We were working on the same thing. I had really goosebumps just pop on my arms. And 2 days later, I was in his office talking. And then that
was a moment of synchronicity, you would call it.
But he has a different story. So he has a.
Ron, how did it go down for you?
Yeah, no, I've always been interested in this topic because I was raised in a family of 5 boys and we turned out very differently. And I was pretty sure parenting had a lot to do with it. But in 2009, I was sitting in a room in the office here with a student at the beginning of the school year. We got in a conversation and somehow we got around to talking about parenting. And she said when she was growing up, if she got a 99 on a test, her mother wanted to know where the other point was.
Right.
And so I was curious about how similarly other students around Harvard had been parented. My guess was that there were actually differences, systematic differences by socioeconomic background, by race and ethnicity. I didn't know what those were, but I was really curious to know what they were. So we put together a project and for a couple of years interviewed about 120 Harvard students about how parents help them turn out to be who they are. I should say that once Tatsha and I hooked up, and I think it was the end of 2014.
Yeah.
When she called.
Yes.
And we decided, really Tatsha decided that we should go find some of these same people, interview them again, but this time also interview their parents. And And then we also continue to identify additional people during the period where we were writing the book. We just run into people who fascinated us and seem really smart, purposeful, and successful, and invite them to allow us to interview them.
And I also have to say, I forgot to say this, that I had already interviewed from that 2005 period to 2014. I had interviewed about 60 people. So there was that Ron's piece, he had his students had interviewed a bunch of people. I had interviewed a bunch of people, and then we started interviewing additional people.
So your book, it comes from essentially the findings that you gleaned from all these interviews.
Right. We were looking for patterns.
Okay.
And eventually the pattern emerged.
So before we get into the pattern, I have one quick question. And maybe it's a simplistic question, but is it good for parents to focus on that missing 1%? Or is it better for parents to focus on the 99%?
What I don't understand the question quite.
You described your student saying, Ma, if I got a 99%, my mother wanted to know where was that missing 1%. I want to know, is that a good strategy? Is that a good thing? Is that what we should be doing as parents?
No.
Okay.
It's a one-word answer.
Okay, good. So I was just curious about that because,
That's the opposite of this book.
Okay, good. I just wanted to clear that up because she is from Harvard, so we don't know.
It turns out even her mother wasn't really that serious about it.
Okay. All right, good. I think I really needed to clear the air on that one. All right. You describe in your book 3 key qualities that are fostered by these, you call them master parents.
Mm-hmm.
So what are those key qualities? And if you don't mind, kind of defining them.
Yeah, we have a little equation, and the equation is smarts plus purpose plus agency equals fully realized.
Okay, so explain.
Tasha, you want me to do it or you want to do it?
Why don't you go on? You're started. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so, smarts is just what people think it is. A child who's got mental dexterity, who can encounter a set of ideas or facts and make sense of them. Purpose is having a sense of direction, having some notion of what you want to change about the world, some propensity to set goals. Agency is the gumption to actually go after those goals. It's that get up and go. It's the opposite of helplessness. And so if you're smart enough to do it, you know what it is you want to do, and you don't feel helpless, and you're likely to go after it, you're likely to become fully realized, which means to make the most of your human potential. And that's what we care about. It's not about grades. It's not about test scores, although grades and test scores will tend to be pretty high among the people we looked at.
Well, I think, I got to say it is about grades. It is about, the truth is most of the people in this book were hot. This book really is about smart kids with a purpose. So academics does play a role. It does play a big role.
It does. But we also talk about the notion that if you've got a kid who's not likely to be a superstar, who's doing the best they can do, we think the formula applies to them too.
Absolutely.
We looked at superstars in the book, and I agree totally with Tatsha that these people are near the top of the heap when it comes to smarts.
And the reason we did that is because, if you really want to find a formula, you have to look at the top of the heap, and you really have to look at how they were parented. But I think Ron is exactly right. And we have many people now call us. One of my writing coach, we were attending a workshop as we were writing this book, and he tells us about his son and how he improved by using the formula. So Ron is right, but for this particular book, the people in the book, they are top of the crop, but also highly, highly purposeful, and the type of people who will one day change the world if they have not already started.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions around that. So when we talk about maximizing potential, are we talking about maximizing career potential, or do we mean having the most fulfilling life personally as well, relationship-wise? What are we really talking about?
We're talking about having the most fulfilling life. We have a chapter on what we mean by success.
Yes.
And we contrast hedonism with eudaimonia.
Yeah.
And hedonism is a life that's focused on pleasure. It's focused on having fun, experiencing luxury. Eudaimonia, on the other hand, is a life that's focused on getting the most of yourself and experiencing what it feels like to learn something well, to deeply understand something, to build your skills in a direction that matches up well with things that you're interested in. So, and each one of us has our own destiny, so to speak, in terms of what it is that self-realization entails for us. But it's self-generated. It's not about somebody else's notion of what its success is. It's about the notion of success that each of us separately comes up with that connects to what makes us feel like we really made the most of this life. We've done all we can, been all that we really want to be in a particular domain of our self-chosen interest. Okay,
got it. Okay, and when you talk about agency, you're really talking about a person's sense of not just self-confidence, but their ability to take the information they have, the knowledge they have, the purpose they have, and turn it into something, do something. It's the action component.
Right. Agency is about doing it, getting up and getting it done, and not feeling helpless, not procrastinating too much.
Yeah, many of the kids, well, all the kids, they're not kids, they're adults now, but when they were children, they had a strong sense of agency. I mean, for example, we talk about a young man named Sangu. Sangu was from Ghana. His father was a village doctor. And his father and him would have these amazing conversations. I mean, conversations that some people may think were too advanced for, a 5-year-old child, but they were just fascinating philosophical conversations. But also, Sangu became so curious, he would ask about, why, he would ask about war, and instead of the father saying, hey, just answering the question, he would suggest Sangu go write Kofi Annan, and that's exactly what Sangu did, and Kofi Annan responded. And then when Sangu was older, around 14 years old, he wanted to go to school in America. So by now, his father didn't have to suggest it. Sangu went on his own, looked on the computer, found a scholarship, saved some money to get his own flight. He did some things to make money. And then he went to his parents and said, I just want a scholarship to America. And I already have the money to fly to America. Now, the parents were shocked, but they were also kind of, excited that their son would take the initiative to do something. And they knew they had started working on him at a very young age. So they were not shocked that at 14 years old, he would have that sense of agency, that gumption.
There are all kinds of examples through the book like that, where young people knew what they wanted to do. Actually, we talk about by the time the kids are in their middle elementary years, they have their own passion projects, and the parents are facilitators and supporters. But it's the young people who are choosing what those passion projects will be.
You had a story in your book about a woman who had a child, and the child went to school, very smart girl, but she would come home, and if she got a mistake on her paper, the teacher would put an unhappy face instead of a smiley face. I don't know, call it a grumpy face. Right. And the parents were very unhappy with that, and proceeded to tell the teacher, hey, that's not going to fly with my child. No more unhappy faces. I personally love that story because in this case, the parent spoke up for the student and really said, let's focus on helping this child thrive and flourish rather than identifying that one area that's bad and turning it into a whole big experience. But I want to get into that. You describe 8 roles that parents play in the lives of high-achieving children or highly successful children in fostering those 3 key qualities. So here they are. I've written them down. Number 1 is the early learning partner. Number 2 is the flight engineer. The 3 is the fixer. Number 4 is the revealer. Number 5 is the philosopher. Number 6, the model. Number 7, the negotiator. And 8, the GPS. So maybe we can quickly run through them and just describe each one of them. Because what I'm really interested in is people who are listening are sitting on the other side of this podcast going, okay, so what do I need to do to raise my kids? I want to get very practical about this.
Yeah, we'll get going. Ron, why don't you go through that?
All right. The early learning partner spends a lot of time with the child in the first 5 years before they start kindergarten, really getting them hooked on learning. And one of the important elements of that is the activities, whether it's reading or playing with blocks or making up stories, it involves problem solving. So they're developing a problem solving orientation in their child before they even start school. So when the child hits some circumstance that seems difficult, is it something they haven't figured out before, they've done it a million times, even before they start school, started with something they didn't understand and figured it out. Mm-hmm. By the time they start kindergarten, most of these kids had beginning reading skills. A lot of them remember the moment their teacher discovered they could read and how excited the teacher was. Mm-hmm. The second role, the flight engineer, is the parent who monitors to make sure things go well. If you think of life as a journey and these high achievers being on a high flight trajectory, the flight engineer makes sure that flight stays on that high trajectory by being vigilant so that when the flight starts to go off track, sometimes because the teacher's not quite doing their job and needs to be corrected, as in the instance you just talked about, whether there will be no more frowny faces on my child's papers, then the parent intervenes. Sometimes the school needs a little bit of help. Sometimes the child that gets a little off track. So this flight engineer is monitoring from a distance and swoops in and intervenes when necessary. The third role is the fixer. The fixer makes sure that no opportunity is lost for lack of resources or connections or whatever, particularly if it's an opportunity that matches up well with that child's interest. I had an experience 2 days ago where a parent was telling me they didn't have money to get their kid into a camp that seemed really important for the child, but they were too embarrassed to ask anybody for it. And so we had a conversation about, sucking up your embarrassment because it's not about you and right. getting what you need to help your child. The fourth role is the philosopher. Is the revealer. And the revealer shows children life's menu. Lets the kid know the world is a lot bigger than our neighborhood. There are all kinds of things to be interested in, places to go, kinds of people to grow up to be. Often the revealer will introduce the child to adults who have careers that match up with the child's interests. The fifth role is the philosopher. And the philosopher takes the child very seriously as the thinker from early on, answers the child's deep questions seriously. Sometimes in Sangu's case that we mentioned earlier, his father might go away and think for 3 days and come back with an answer to some deeply philosophical question this 4 or 5 year old had asked. But the philosopher helps children find a sense of purpose, helps them establish a moral compass. And so I think of it as the second most important role behind the early learning partner. The sixth role is the model. The model conducts themselves in a way that the child wants to emulate. The model shows the child how to do certain kinds of things. The seventh role is the negotiator, who teaches the child how to make their case, how to self-advocate, how to speak truth to power respectfully, how to behave in ways that people want to cooperate with them. And then finally, the eighth role is the GPS navigational voice, which is the parent's voice in the young person's head after they've left home. They find themselves in particular situations, and their dad's voice comes up coaching them from all those earlier lessons that the master parents have taught, or their mother's voice, or sometimes a mentor's voice. But this GPS navigational voice, like the disembodied voice in our cars when we're driving around. So those roles emerged from these interviews. We went into the process with an open mind. We were not trying to test any particular hypothesis. We were trying to just discover, and this was really an investigative activity. We were like a little detective team talking to all these people, trying to discern whether there was a pattern. And Tatsha thought there was going to be a formula. I wasn't so sure. I thought there might be several different storylines for different people from different backgrounds. But
what we kept discovering is the parents and the children, again, these are adults, they kept saying the same thing. I mean, they didn't know each other, but it was the same thing, like, when I was in kindergarten, my teacher was so excited that I knew my ABCs and my 1, 2, 3s. And that set me on a course. I mean, we would hear that over and over and over. Or the parents saying I had to figure out something, or I had to strategize. Or sometimes they wouldn't even say it, but how they helped their child, it was exactly how someone else helped their child. And it was just the same thing over and over. And we would also study people like Einstein, like how was he raised? And it was the same thing, some of the same exact strategies. So we found that really exciting. And it was actually Ron who decided, we were like, how are we going to, all these actions, these similar actions, how do we categorize them? And so Ron decided, what about roles? And so that's how we created these 8 roles.
So I have a few questions. Do you think that any of these contradict one another? For example, the negotiator might contradict the fixer. You know, in the case of the negotiator, the parent is teaching the child to advocate for him or herself. In the case of the fixer, the parent swoops in and does the advocating. Is this age specific, or is there a bit of a clash that could exist here?
The only one that's age specific, there's 2. There's the learning partner and usually the flight engineer, because the flight engineer happens like it's a stage. Those are the 2 only stage oriented roles, because right after a child, when the child is around 5 or around 4 or 5 years old, they start going to kindergarten. So now the flight engineer works from home or from command central. But I don't really think they contradict each other. So maybe maybe a child can't deal with something that's happening at school. The little girl that we talked about, she was too young to really deal with that smiley face. She went to her parent, and the parent decided, in this particular case, I'm going to deal with this. Now, that young lady also, when she was a little girl, she dealt with other issues herself. But there are certain things a parent will decide this is a little too big. You know, my child should not be dealing with this. I'm going to deal with this. There was another situation, a little girl named Maya. Maya was in 2nd grade. Really smart little girl. She had a teacher who was just not very green. And Maya at 2nd grade knew she noticed that the teacher was very green. And so the teacher would, instead of reading and studying in class, she would have the kids doing like little, you know, like, what was it, Ron? Like cartwheels. So little Maya, who's in 2nd grade, went to her mother and told her, you know, this is what's happening. And she asked her mom, what are you going to do? And Maya's mother said, no, it's not what I'm going to do. It's what you're going to do. So she helped her child come up with a plan. But Maya, it was little 2nd grade Maya who walked into the principal's office and said, I have an issue, and made an appointment. The principal took her seriously, and the teacher was later fired. But so these parents, these master parents, are students of their children. So they know their child. And so they really look at the situation and decide when should they be the flight engineer. Of course, they're not saying flight engineer. When should I, take control of this and help the teachers out? Or when should I send my child to deal with the situation themselves and learn to negotiate and practice those skills that I taught them, early on?
Yeah, Maya's mother had coached her on how to talk to that principal, as Tasha was just said. But we should emphasize, we talk about these parents as being intentional and strategic. So they're always in charge. They never just turn their kid totally loose. But they give strategic autonomy. And they give quite a bit of it, because by the time these kids are in elementary school or middle elementary school, they're so firmly on track. They know what they're interested in. They're just headed in the right direction. And so most of the time, there's no need for the parent to impose a mid-course correction. Sometimes the parent has questions with the child's choices. For example, you may know Suzanne Melveau, the CNN reporter. She has a twin sister, Suzette. In middle school, they wanted to join the Boy Scouts. And their mother didn't think it was a good idea at all. But they negotiated with their parents, and their parents said, okay, fine. and they became, I think, the first young ladies in the country to join the Boy Scouts.
So when you did this research, was there anything that came out as a surprise to either of you? Like, did something emerge that you said, wow, that's really interesting?
Well, for me, it was that race or class really didn't matter. It did not matter. One of the people in the book, one person in the book, he was raised partially in a homeless shelter. Very poor, family. Mom raised 3 children by herself. But yet she would teach that young boy, Jarrell Lee, who's just amazing. She would teach him on the bed of the homeless shelter how to read, those 1, 2, 3s. And we saw that over and over. Some of the same practices that she did, we would talk to a parent who was a judge. They would do the same thing. So we thought race and socioeconomics might come to play, but it did not. Now, am I saying that it wasn't harder for Jarrell's mother to do some of the things? Of course it was, but she was strategic and she was relentless like all the other parents. And so it was just fascinating to see these same strategies happening across cultures, across socioeconomic levels.
Now, I'm curious about one thing. Do you think that these, how do we call them, super successful individuals, superhumans, do you think that,
by any
not
means.
superhumans, just super successful individuals, do you think that they had perhaps a specific learning style? Like, that enabled all of this to come to them with greater ease? I know that you said they were smart, but when we look at how education is structured, perhaps school, the way it is now, favored them. Just curious about that.
Yeah, we look at that in the book. We definitely talk about that in the book. We look at 2 families. One where there were 3 boys, and one boy was more of he had to study harder. There was another boy who didn't have to study that hard. He could remember. And there was another one who had to hear, he had to hear things. And so it was harder for the third one. He did not make the great grades. He did not, but because he didn't read, he wasn't a reader. So that was an issue for him. And the parents, though, we do not use the parents in this particular story as a master parent, because they were not quite students of their child. They parented the same way for each child. We believe that the master parents are students of their child. They look at the child and then decide how to parent them. So we had another family where there were 3 children, all of them pretty smart. One, like the other, she did not make the great grades. The parents didn't push her because they knew she was more social. They thought she was just as smart, but she was more social. The other 2, they had it in them to push really hard and to learn things very quickly. And so if those 2 made maybe a B, they would question why. So again, these parents, yes, there were many people in the book where they had different styles, but it wasn't that the schools, I think it was more easy. It was easier for them in school. I think it was the parents caught on very quickly, caught on how the child learned.
Well, one of the themes is that all these people we interviewed were receptive learners as little kids. And some of them had siblings that were not as receptive to learning as they were, right? And so some of those siblings didn't do as well. Our hunch is that some of the ones that were not as receptive also did not receive the intensive early learning partner experience that their peers did. We actually, in a chapter on siblings, there's a subheading, was your oldest kid really smarter, or were you just tired with the rest of them? Or
right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but they were all receptive. But I should also say that there were different learning styles. We had one, actually the Malveaux, Suzanne had a stutter through elementary school. And both of those sisters, their parents were just patient. They matched the parenting to the child, and they both kind of really blossomed around 5th or 6th or 7th grade and became superstars after that. but they'd also had a really strong foundation early on. So it's not, and it wasn't easy for a lot of these folks either, but they were so engaged and so interested that they did the hard work. It wasn't that they were forced to do it. We actually have a section on tiger parenting where we suggest the tiger part of the tiger parenting may have been unnecessary. Tiger parents do a bunch of the other things that we talk about, and they didn't really need to be as heavy-handed as they were.
What's the one thing that you find parents struggle with the most? Like, out of all the 8 roles, where's the one where parents really, it doesn't come to them easily? I mean, if you have all 8 in place, that's great, but we find that parents maybe are a little lax or, not as strong. Have you noticed that as a pattern?
Yeah, I think it would probably be the flight engineer. Now, most of the people in the book, they played all roles, but we do believe if one role isn't played, it's going to be hard. It's going to be really tough. So we found in several cases the flight engineer was not played. That's when the parent, is in command central. The kid is at school, but they're kind of keeping an eye and monitoring. And when the situation happens, they deal with it. So like in one case, there was a young man. He was really smart, but the father, who was a great learning partner, would work with him when he was a really young child. But when the young boy went on to school, the father wasn't paying attention. Mm-hmm. So he would have noticed that there were some things going on, and he didn't. And so that caused some problems, real big problems. And I want you to read it and find out. But there's a mystery there. But it really caused some big problems down the line. So again, the young man was smart. The father was an amazing, amazing learning partner. These were not rich. This was not a rich family. But he was not a flight engineer at all. So they really went through some problems. And it's hard being a parent, but if he had been that flight engineer, really noticed what was going on with his son at school, things probably would have been a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes it's easy when your child is doing fantastically in early elementary school, just to assume they're on track, it's going fine. You can tune out. You don't need to keep paying attention. But you do need to keep paying attention because they don't always stay on track.
Let's talk for a minute about the role of, this word makes me itchy, but the role of discipline in parenting. Right. So what do you find? Are parents strict? Are they the reprimanding kinds? Do they operate with the rule of natural consequences? Like, what do you see? What have you seen?
Most of the people in our book didn't need to be disciplined that much, but when they did, their parents were very strategic. A few of them were hard to handle as little kids. I mean, they were very strong-willed, and the parents handled it in ways that were not trying to break that strong will, but were trying to allow the child to know where the boundaries were. And they searched for different ways, and the book talks about how these parents figured out how to keep these kids within the bounds. Other times, there are things like a kid wants to go to a raucous beach party, and the parent is worried it won't be safe and says, no, you can't do that. But generally, it was very measured parenting. There were boundaries, but it wasn't super strict. The parent allowed the child to make their choices, did not impose choices. Go on, Tasha.
It was, they were authoritative. So that's kind of strict, not strict. You know what I mean? Strict, lenient. That's how one parent said it, Jarrell's mom. So these were not pushovers, but they started early. So they start, like, even when we talked to Obama about raising his children, President Obama, he said that he started like setting a clock so that his 2 daughters,
alarm clocks in for.
Yes. They had to set an alarm clock, so they had to wake themselves up.
Right.
But he started on that at a very early age.
4 years old.
Yeah, 4 years old. So some of these parents had started these routines and actions early on, but they were not pushovers. They were tough parents, but also lenient. They would allow the child to negotiate. So if there was an issue, they wouldn't just say no. If the child came up with a really good, answer and was able to debate in a respectful way and win the argument, the parent might rethink things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I gotta say, one thing I want to say, I don't want it to sound like this was easy for the parents. This is really hard work, right, Ron? I mean, this was really, really hard work for these parents. It's just they had something in their background, which we call the burn, that motivated them to do this.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that they were strategic in a way that it was manageable, right?
It was manageable.
It wasn't, these weren't parents who every moment of the day, they weren't helicopter parents.
No, not at all.
They had their own lives, but we talk about strategic time. And so it's not that they was every 24/7, although they were kind of tuned in, but it was, they knew when to tune in and how tight to set the constraints, so to speak.
True, but they were relentless and they worked really hard at it. You're right. They were not helicopter parents I don't think, not at all. They would never want to be that type, but they were definitely, like Ron said, in tune. But they started at a very young age. Now, if someone really doesn't want to be that in tune, it's going to be hard for them. They actually were motivated by their own background. So they had this sense of motivation, and they had this sense of know-how. And I think that it wasn't that they just knew everything. They just were willing to figure it out. And figuring it out was it's a huge theme in the story.
Yeah, and they were so determined to be great parents that they did figure it out. One of the places where parents made sacrifices is with the fixer, right? When we had the parents who, particularly the lower income parents, you know, they went to pretty great lengths to be sure that opportunities were available to their kids. And when you talk about something being really, really hard, these folks did make some sacrifices.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me. I have 5 kids of my own, and all of them are very, very different from one another. One of them particularly stands out, and I remember this very clearly. And he came to me one day distraught. He was in his beginning of second year of university, and he hated it. And he wasn't particularly academically interested or strong, but I knew he was very, very smart and very capable and very creative and he was an interesting child. And he came to me in a great deal of distress. And he said, you know, like, what's going to happen to me? All my other siblings are super successful and I'm a loser. Oh man, that was really, really like, a big moment for us. And I said, you listen to me, and you listen to me carefully. Just because you're not going to go down the traditional path, right, you are still going to be extraordinarily successful. You work hard, you get your stuff done. It might not be through academic excellence, but it will be, right? So it was this kind of die-hard vision of his success that he completely leaned into. And if you could see him now, I mean, he's one of the hardest working kids I know. It's incredible how he turned his life around because he was able to say, okay, this really isn't working for me, this path. And I gave him the permission to do, fine. Every other kid goes down this path. That's fine. You don't have to go down this path to be successful. It's okay to have a unique path.
Yep.
That permission was a big part of his turnaround.
Yeah, the notion is that every one of us has our own unique North Star.
Yeah. And for
there
me,
never was any competition to get there. We just have to figure out what it is and go for it, and the world will be a better place.
That's right. So, so we learn the 8 roles. We learn the 3 key qualities. But for me, I think one of the greatest takeaways of this conversation is every kid is unique. Figure out your kid. And you wrote in your book, be a student of your child. Yes. In other words, really learn your child, learn how the child is wired, learn how they thrive, learn what they need to maximize their potential. It's not a one formula fits all kind of model. And I think that message is really crucial. Learn your child.
But then also have a sense of agency yourself, knowing that you can have an impact on your child's life.
Yes.
Right. You can use what you learn by being a student of your child to say things at just the right time, like you just did to your child when they came with this problem, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And to play those roles.
Yeah.
The parent needs to have a sense of agency to play those roles. And the book gives lots of rich examples of how parents do that. And we know already, we run into people all the time who are using what they've learned from the book to influence the way they parent.
So I know you're tight for time. Before we end, you have a unique opportunity, as I did, in being able to speak to you, but you've got a coach on the line. Is there a question you have for this coach? There a struggle you're having? Anything?
How can we get our book to the largest number of people? That's
You know what? This one question is, and me and Ron talked about this, and this is honest. We wrote this book because we found information out. We really worked and tried to find information, and we have the information, and this is a problem that me and Ron have talked about a lot. So it's like, besides the media, Ron believes there's you have to create systems, so that people who don't have the money, the tutors to pay tutors or whatever, to use these qualities. I believe that we don't have time to create systems, that this information needs to get out. If parents had the information, we're saying regardless of who you are, here is the information, use it. And I'm just, this has been an issue we've talked about for months and months and months. And maybe that is the question. How do you, besides the media, and this is not a marketing question, this is a practical question. How could parents, we did all the work for them. How can they get the information and use it? What do you think?
Yeah. So for me, again, I read a good chunk of the book, and there are stories with a lot of examples, and there's the rationale behind it, and there's the learning, and there's the research. And for me, the next step is, how do I implement? So in a way, I am looking for, as I'm sure many parents are, so how do I learn my child? What do I need to do to study them? How do I step in when the child needs it? What's the best way to talk to a teacher or a principal so that the teacher doesn't have anything against my child after I finish talking to them? And on and on and on. So it's the how-to component. So perhaps it's a workbook. Maybe it's a coaching class. For me, one of the principles that I use when I coach a lot of executives who are having problems with their children is, look, think about what you want to achieve with your child, and then look at your behavior and notice that your behavior doesn't match your actual desire. It clashes. So if you want your kids to be super independent, stepping in every single time they have a problem doesn't necessarily achieve that goal. What is the goal? And so then we come up with strategies for them to actually achieve what they want to achieve. I'll give you a very simple example. When my daughter was very little, we'd prepare lunch together. I'd make the sandwiches, she'd prepare the snacks. Every day I had the same conversation with her. Mom, how many cookies do you think I should take with me to school? And every day my answer was the same. How many cookies do you think you should take? Because I didn't want to be the one with the answer. I wanted her to use her own reasoning. I wanted her to figure it out, and I wanted it to be okay. I wanted her to make the decisions.
But what we master parent.
Right. Well, but what we see is with a lot of parents, they make decisions for their child, and then they scratch their heads wondering why their kids don't know how to make decisions independently.
I think one important piece to stick in there is the importance of listening.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You become a student of your child by listening to your child.
Yeah.
And then thinking about what to do with what you hear.
Yes.
And continuing to respect the child's judgment, to help guide it when it needs to be guided, but to encourage the child to make judgment, to think hard, and to know that you're a sounding board.
Right.
For them, and not just a place where they can come get an order.
Right. And so to answer your question, Tasha, one extra piece or an addendum or a workbook that says, here are the actions, the things that you can do to help you play these roles in your child's life.
Yeah, we keep hearing that, a workbook also. I agree. I mean, this is a movement. Ron's been working on a similar movement for a while. So we really believe this is a movement. People have been wondering, how do we do this? Again, we picked some of the top people, but from that, we call it reconstructed their lives to show how it happened. We reconstructed the parents' lives to see how it happened. So we want people to look at this as kind of like not a Bible, but definitely to show you that, you can be strategic and make a big difference in your child's life.
And since Tasha characterized my point of view, let me express it real briefly here. The idea is just we had master parents who didn't have a lot, who went searching for the extra pieces that they needed to fill in. And all I'm saying is that we need to be sure when they go searching that those things are there to be found. And some of that is the responsibility of communities. I agree totally with Tatsha that from the parent's point of view, if you're talking to the parent, the answer is no excuses. Just keep pushing, find a work, figure it out, find what you need. But if I'm talking to the broader society, I'm also saying when the parent has done everything they can do, make sure that the other parts of the pieces are there to be found.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all.
Well, I want to thank you both for spending this time with me, for being on the show, for sharing your findings, for doing this work. Once again, please share with our audience the name of the book and where they can find it.
Yes. Go on, Ron. I'm sorry.
No, it's called The Formula, Unlocking the Secrets to Raising Highly Successful Children. So it's The Formula, Unlocking the Secrets to Raising Highly Successful Children. You can find Ferguson and Tasha Robertson.
Right, Tasha Robertson, yeah, and you can find the book anywhere, any of the stores. But also, please check out our website. It's called Masters of the Formula. We'll be doing a lot of things. .com. We're doing a lot of things. We're talking to parents. Ron just had an amazing interview. I just had an amazing interview. We're going to be starting a podcast. So this movement is, we're just starting it, and we're going to have a lot of fun. And I just hope your listeners will be part of it. mastersoftheformula.com.
Well, count me in. I want in. So, guys, thank you so much for being part of this. And whoever's listening, buy the book.
Yes.
You have to have it. If you have kids, grandchildren, any kids in your life, buy the book.
Or if you're just a smart person.
There you go.
Want to know
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care. Thanks. You enjoyed it.